struggling to survive and take care of her mother, whose health is deteriorating every day. Lila, a 13-year-old girl, lives among wilted flowers and endless nights. Hope is fading fast until an unexpected encounter with Michael, a powerful and generous man, changes their lives in ways she could never have imagined. Clearwater was a town that always seemed half asleep. Located on the east coast of the United States, its quiet streets were a stark contrast to the hustle and bustle of big cities. It was a place with few opportunities, where daily life moved in a slow, repetitive rhythm. For Lila, that small town was both a refuge and a prison. As she looked out the window of the modest room she shared with her mother, she felt the weight of what Clearwater represented, a constant struggle to survive. Lila was only 13, but her life was already burdened with responsibilities far beyond her years. Her mother, Bethany, had been battling a chronic lung disease for years, leaving her unable to work. The sound of Bethany's muffled coughs often filled their small house, a constant reminder to Lila that time was not on their side. Every night, Lila went out to sell flowers on the streets of Clearwater. It was the only way she could help support the household and pay for Bethany's increasingly expensive medical treatments. The small local flower shop where Lila worked during the day allowed her to take some flowers to sell on her own at night. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover the basics, food, and if she was lucky, another doctor's visit or a necessary medication. Despite the town's peaceful appearance, there wasn't much sympathy for Lila's situation. She walked the streets with a small cart full of flowers, hoping to find some movement near the restaurants or downtown. "Fresh flowers, only $5, she would call out, her voice cutting through the quiet of the night, hoping a couple or group of friends would stop and buy a bouquet. Some would smile politely, but most just walked past, ignoring her entirely. But Lila never let the discouragement show. Each night was another chance to scrape together the money she needed. The smile she forced on her face while offering the flowers masked the deep exhaustion she felt, both physically and emotionally. Bethany always told her, "Good things come to those who don't give up," and those words echoed in Lila's mind every time she went out to face the town. By the time Lila got home, usually around 11 p.m., Bethany was still awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with one of the few old books she could still manage to hold in her frail hands. "How was your night, sweetheart?" Bethany would always ask with a mix of concern and love. Lila usually responded with a smile, avoiding talking about the tougher nights when sales were few or non-existent. That particular night, after yet another frustrating walk around the town, Lila returned home with only a few dollars in her pocket. The sound of Bethany's cough seemed louder than usual, and Lila's heart tightened. Her mother's condition was worsening, and the treatment, which already felt like it was dragging on, was becoming more urgent by the day. "I just need more time," Lila thought, trying to hold back the tears as she prepared her mother's evening tea. Despite the hardships, there were still moments of tenderness. At the end of each night, Lila would sit beside Bethany's bed, and they would talk about anything that could distract them from their harsh reality. Whether it was a book Lila had read or stories from when Bethany was young and full of life, their soft laughter often broke the heavy silence of the house. But that night, Bethany seemed more worn down than usual. Her coughing was more persistent, and her eyes, which usually held a gentle warmth, now reflected a sadness she tried to hide. "I hate that you have to go through this," Bethany said, her voice weak as tears welled up in her eyes. "I should be the one taking care of you, not the other way around." She paused, coughing again, and squeezed Lila's hand gently. "You're so strong, Lila. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry your life has become this because of me." Lila shook her head, her eyes also filling with tears, but she kept smiling. "You're going to get better, Mom. I know you will." And even though she desperately wanted to believe her own words, the sadness in Bethany's eyes made it clear that she carried the weight of guilt for not being able to give her daughter the childhood she deserved. Clearwater was a town that seemed to never change, but inside Lila's house, there was a constant battle for change. Every new morning, Lila would get up with the same determination as always, ready to face the day and once again sell flowers that night. While the town slept, she worked, driven by the hope that someday something, or someone, would come along and change their lives forever. The humid air of Clearwater felt heavier than usual that night, as if the atmosphere itself had joined in on Lila's struggles. The streets were empty, except for the distant sound of waves breaking along the coast. Lila walked slowly, the small cart of flowers bumping along the uneven sidewalk. She had been out for hours, and so far, she hadn't sold a single bouquet. With each step, her body felt heavier, weighed down by the growing sense of failure. She scanned the area, hoping to spot anyone, who might buy at least one flower. But the shop lights were shutting off, and the flow of pedestrians dwindled as the night wore on. A couple hurried past her without even glancing at the flowers. "Please, just one bouquet," Lila thought, but the words stuck in her throat. She was tired of being ignored. As the hours dragged on, the town grew even more deserted, and the desperation inside her began to swell. What if I go home empty-handed? The little money she had saved up wasn't enough to cover even the cheapest of her mother's medications, and their last doctor's visit had nearly wiped out their savings. She knew Bethany was getting worse. The cough was deeper, more frequent, but the doctor had said they couldn't adjust the treatment without new tests. The feeling of helplessness weighed heavily on Lila's heart. She remembered a time when Bethany was still able to leave the house and work as a seamstress when everything seemed simpler. Back then, the nights weren't filled with constant worry and the looming fear of losing her mother. Lila could focus on school and had time to be a normal girl. Now, school was a distant distraction. Her only concern was making enough money to keep the house running and care for Bethany. The night was nearly over when Lila finally gave up. With a deep sigh, she turned back toward the small house she shared with her mother. Her hands were cold, despite the warm night air. With each step, she felt the weight of failure as if the cart behind her were growing heavier, dragging her backward. "Maybe tomorrow," she whispered to herself, trying to find some comfort in the emptiness. When she reached home, the faint light from Bethany's bedroom was still on. The sound of her mother's coughing was the first thing she heard as she opened the door. It was a harsh, continuous sound that seemed to vibrate through the whole house. Lila slipped off her shoes and barefoot went to her mother's room. "Hi, Mom," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "I didn't sell anything today." Bethany was sitting up in bed, pale and visibly weaker. The effort of breathing showed on her face, and Lila felt a knot form in her throat at the sight of her. "It's okay, sweetheart," Bethany replied, her voice hoarse and broken by coughs. "Tomorrow will be better." Lila knew her mother was trying to be strong, but she could see the exhaustion and guilt in her eyes. "You shouldn't be the one doing this," Bethany murmured after a moment, avoiding her daughter's gaze. "I should be taking care of you." A silent tear slid down Bethany's face, and Lila's chest tightened. It was the kind of sadness that cut deep, like a wound that never healed. "Mom, it's going to be okay," Lila said quickly, sitting on the bed beside her and holding her hands. But they both knew it wasn't that simple. The bills piling up, the lack of money for medicine, and the constant fear that Bethany wouldn't get better hung over them like dark clouds. Bethany sighed heavily, her breathing uneven. I'm so sorry, Lila. You should be in school, hanging out with friends, being a kid your age, not living this life." Lila tried to hold back her tears, but one slipped down her face. "I do this because I love you, Mom. We'll get through this together." That promise, though sincere, felt fragile in the face of their struggles. With every night Lila returned home empty-handed, the despair grew. She knew time was running out for her mother, and every time Bethany coughed, Lila felt like she was losing another part of her. It wasn't just the illness eating away at Bethany's body, but the guilt that weighed on both of them. The heavy silence settled over the room for a while. Bethany finally lay back down, her eyes slowly closing as she tried to find some relief in sleep. Lila sat by the bed, watching her mother until her breathing softened. Looking at her mother's worn, tired face, Lila felt a deep emptiness inside. She got up slowly, walked over to the window, and stared out into the darkness. The stars seemed distant, out of reach. The town around her was silent, as if everyone else had found their rest, except her. Everything felt so relentless, as if the universe refused to give them any break. "I just need more time," Lila whispered to herself, eyes fixed on the horizon. But time felt like it was slipping away from her, and with each passing day, she felt more desperate. Just a little more. She went back to her own bed, exhausted, but sleep didn't come easily. Thoughts of the future, or the lack of it, kept her awake. Was there any way to change this? Any chance of saving them from this spiral of suffering? Or was this just the life that fate had handed them? As the world around her sank into silence, Lila finally fell asleep, her heart heavy and full of unanswered questions. The weeks that followed were relentless for Lila and Bethany. Bethany's cough had become more violent, her breathing more labored. The harsh sound filled their small house constantly, a cruel reminder that their time was running out. Lila knew she needed more money to keep her mother's treatment going, but no matter how hard she tried, the flower sales remained insufficient. One afternoon, while the sun was still up, Lila knew she couldn't put it off any longer. Bethany's medication was running out, and doctor visits were out of the question. With a heavy heart, Lila walked to the pharmacy in downtown Clearwater, a place where she was already known for her attempts to negotiate, always hoping to get her mother's medicine at a discount. When she reached the counter, the pharmacist, a middle-aged man with a perpetually stern expression, looked at her with a mixture of weariness and pity. "Lila, I'm sorry," he said before she could even ask, "but you're already behind on the last 2 bottles. I can't give you any more credit." Lila pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to cry right there. "Please, I'll pay you as soon as I can. Just 1 more bottle, please." The pharmacist sighed and shook his head slowly. "I can't do that. I have my own family to take care of, you understand? I'm sorry." She left the pharmacy with empty hands and a heavy heart. Every door that closed on her was a reminder of her helplessness. The small flower cart was still parked on a nearby street corner, filled with bouquets she knew wouldn't sell. The streets were nearly deserted that afternoon, and Clearwater felt emptier and more distant than ever. When she returned home, Bethany's cough greeted her from the sidewalk. Lila walked inside, and the stale air hit her. Bethany was lying on the couch, pale and visibly weaker. "How did it go, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice interrupted by a cough that seemed endless. "I couldn't get the medicine," Lila murmured, feeling ashamed that she couldn't help her own mother. The weight of guilt began to pile on her shoulders. "But I'll get it tomorrow." Time felt like it was slipping through Lila's fingers. Bethany was getting worse, increasingly dependent on the few remaining medications. One night, while making soup for dinner, Lila felt the desperation in her heart tighten like never before. The fear of losing her mother, of failing to save her, was almost unbearable. She knew her efforts, as well-intentioned as they were, weren't enough. After setting the soup bowl on the table, she sat next to Bethany and watched as her mother tried to eat. "I'll figure it out," Lila whispered, more to herself than to her mother. "I'll find a way." But deep down, her faith was wavering. Was anyone listening to her silent prayers? That night, after putting Bethany to bed, Lila felt she could no longer carry the weight alone. Her eyes were swollen from holding back tears, and her physical and emotional exhaustion finally overtook her. Feeling hopeless and completely lost, she knelt beside her bed. The room was completely dark, except for a faint moonlight filtering through the window. Lila closed her eyes tightly and, for the first time in a long while, allowed herself to speak directly to God. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible, but filled with a depth of desperation she had never felt before. "God," she began, hesitantly, "I know you're there. I know I've heard stories of miracles, of people being saved, of lives changing. I've never asked for much for myself, but I need a miracle now." Tears began to flow down her face, and she didn't try to stop them. "Please don't take my mom away from me. I don't know what to do. I'm trying so hard, every day, but it feels like the harder I fight, the worse things get. I'm alone, and I don't know how much longer she can hold on. Please, help me take care of her." She swallowed hard, the pain in her chest growing. "I'm only 13. I shouldn't have to do all this by myself, but I won't give up on her. I promise I'll keep fighting, but I need help. I need a chance to save her." The room remained silent, the darkness seeming to respond with an oppressive void. But Lila stayed kneeling, her eyes closed, her heart open. "I just want her to be okay. I don't need anything for myself. Just save my mom, please." When she finally finished, Lila felt drained, as though she had poured out everything in her heart. She stood up slowly, wiped the tears from her face, and crawled back into bed. The silence of the night didn't bring immediate answers, but for a brief moment, she felt lighter, as if at least her pain had been heard. The next day, Bethany's condition worsened even more. She could barely get out of bed, and Lila found herself in an even more desperate situation. The money had run out completely. The flowers she carried to sell were wilting in the cart because she hadn't been able to sell any in the past few nights. The feeling of helplessness was now almost unbearable. As she walked the streets, Lila began to consider alternatives. What if I sold the house? What if I begged people on the streets? The ideas passed through her mind without any shame because the urgency was real. She knew she was just a child, taking care of her sick mother all on her own, and asking strangers for help didn't seem so absurd anymore. "Maybe tomorrow I'll go to the market and ask for help from someone," she thought quietly, feeling the weight of the decision. Their survival, hers and her mother's, depended on it. As she considered these options, Bethany's cough echoed through the house once again, even more intense and persistent. Lila rushed to the bedroom, finding her mother lying on her side, her breathing uneven, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "It's going to be okay, Mom," Lila said, gently holding her hand, trying to project a strength she no longer felt. "I'll figure it out." But inside, Lila knew she was on the verge of giving up. The nights began to blend together in a haze of exhaustion and uncertainty. Every night, Lila would go out with her flower cart, only to return with the same flowers, watching as her mother's health slowly declined. With each rejection for help and every door closed in her face, her fear grew inside her like an unstoppable shadow. The only comfort Lila found was in her silent prayers. Those prayers, whispered in the dark, were her last hope. Even without answers, she continued to pray, searching for strength in a world that often seemed full of nothing but silence. The nights in Clearwater had grown colder and emptier for Lila. With each step she took on the deserted streets, dragging her flower cart behind her, her despair grew. She no longer knew how to keep hope alive. Bethany's health was deteriorating rapidly, and the medications had run out completely. All her promises of, "I'll figure it out," were starting to sound hollow, even to herself. Lila had tried everything. She knocked on neighbors' doors, begged for help at the pharmacy, but the answer was always the same: "I'm sorry." Her last attempts to sell flowers were equally frustrating. Few customers stopped by, and even fewer bought anything. People's eyes passed over her as if she were invisible, just another insignificant part of the town's scenery. She had also tried asking for money from people walking quickly through the streets. Some had given her pitying looks, while others completely ignored her. The little she had managed to collect barely covered a basic meal for her and her mother. Lila was beginning to believe that the world's doors were closed to them. That night, Lila returned home earlier than usual, with nothing in her pockets but a few coins. As she opened the door, Bethany's incessant cough greeted her once again. Her mother looked paler than ever, her eyes dulled from the effort of breathing. The house smelled of mildew and expired medicine, filling the air with an oppressive weight. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mom," Lila whispered as she knelt beside the bed, holding her mother's cold hands. Her mother's breathing was uneven, every breath a painful effort. I tried everything." Bethany opened her eyes, her pale, thin face trying to smile. "I know you're trying, sweetheart," her voice barely a murmur. "But maybe it's time to accept that we can't control everything." Those words felt like knives in Lila's heart. Accept what? That her mother was dying? That she couldn't save her? The thought of giving up was unbearable. "No, Mom. I'm still going to find a way. I promise." Bethany looked at her daughter, love and sorrow reflected in her eyes, but said nothing more. She was too weak to argue, and the silence that followed was more painful than any words could have been. That night, after making sure her mother was asleep, Lila went out again, not really knowing what she was looking for. Clearwater's silence was oppressive, and its empty streets made her feel completely isolated. The dim streetlights cast weak light on the vacant sidewalks, creating shadows that seemed to stretch with each step she took. She walked aimlessly for a while, her mind running in circles. "Maybe this is it," she thought. "Maybe this is my life. There's no way out." Every time she tried something new, she found a new barrier, a new no in her path. As she walked, it began to drizzle lightly, adding to her exhaustion. The drops fell on her face, mixing with the tears she no longer tried to hold back. Feeling drained, Lila stopped near a busy restaurant and leaned against a wall, watching the people inside eating and laughing as if the world were much easier for them than it was for her. Then, in the midst of the exhaustion and the rain, a man's voice broke through her trance. "You look tired." Lila glanced to her side and saw a tall man, dressed in an expensive suit, standing a few feet away. He looked at her with curiosity, but also with concern. Unlike the many people who passed by her every day, this man seemed to really see her. Lila quickly wiped the tears from her face, trying to pull herself together. I'm just trying to sell flowers," she said, without much conviction, pointing to the small cart beside her, still filled with bouquets now wet from the rain. The man stepped closer, observing the situation with a calm that seemed out of place in the moment. "Are you doing this all on your own? It seems like a lot of work for someone your age." Lila just nodded, unwilling to explain her entire life story to a stranger. He was silent for a few seconds, as if considering something. There was an empathy in his eyes that unsettled her. No one had ever looked at her that way before, with genuine concern. "How old are you?" the man asked. 13, Lila replied, not caring about the monotone in her own voice. She was too tired to engage in any real conversation. 13 and already with all this responsibility, the man commented, almost to himself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $50 bill. I'll take a bouquet and keep the change. Lila looked at the bill with distrust, feeling even more disoriented. That's too much. I can't take that much money for a bouquet, she protested, almost without strength. But the man just smiled, never taking his eyes off her. It's not for the bouquet, he said, handing her the money. Consider it a little help. I'm a client at the pharmacy, and the owner told me your story. I hope this helps you and your mom. At those words, Lila finally let her guard down, her gaze dropping to the ground as a fresh wave of tears threatened to spill. No one had ever offered help so directly, so sincerely. That simple $50 bill felt like a miracle, a small glimmer of hope amidst the chaos of her life. Thank you, she murmured, her voice barely audible. The man nodded, but before turning to leave, he made a surprising offer. I'm hosting a big event in a few weeks and need good floral decorations. If you're interested, I can pay you well for your work. Lila could hardly believe what she was hearing. It was an unexpected offer, something that might be the answer to all her prayers. You do that? She asked, still incredulous. Yes, he replied, with a sincere smile. I believe that sometimes people just need a chance, and I'm offering you that chance. That night, when Lila returned home, she still couldn't believe what had happened. While Bethany slept, Lila sat on the edge of the bed, holding the $50 bill in her hands. It was as if she were standing in front of a new possibility, a chance to change everything. But at the same time, a sense of fear was growing inside her. What if I fail? What if this miracle is just a fleeting illusion? But the next morning, when Bethany woke up more debilitated than ever, coughing and struggling to breathe, Lila knew she had no choice. She had to seize this opportunity with everything she had. It was the only way to save her mother. In the days that followed, Lila met with Michael to discuss the details of the event. He took her to a luxurious restaurant downtown, a place Lila would never have entered on her own. The walls gleamed under the golden light of chandeliers, and the smell of refined food filled the air, a stark contrast to the reality she faced at home. Michael led her to a table and ordered something simple to drink. He was polite but straightforward and didn't seem to talk down to Lila. That made her feel more comfortable, but the nerves were still palpable. The event will be in 3 weeks, he said, handing her a sheet with the details. It's a charity dinner I'm organizing, and I'd like you to handle all the floral decorations. It's a big task, but I'll pay you well for it. It should be enough to help with your mother's care for a while. Michael's words sounded like music to Lila's ears. The amount he mentioned was more than she could have imagined earning in a year selling flowers on the street. It was the chance she had been waiting for, but the weight of responsibility hit her like a stone. What if I can't do it? What if I mess everything up? Do you think you can handle it? Michael asked, noticing the hesitation in her eyes. Lila looked at the paper, the detailed instructions of what he wanted for the event. It was far more work than she was used to. She didn't know anything about large floral decorations, just simple arrangements and bouquets she sold on the street. But in that moment, the image of her bedridden mother came to mind. The sound of the cough, the pale face. She couldn't fail. I can do it, she said, her voice firm, though inside, fear was eating away at her. Michael nodded, satisfied with her response. Great. You have 3 weeks to prepare. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I trust you'll do a great job. Back home, Lila began planning how she would handle the decorations for the event. 3 weeks wasn't much time, and she knew she would have to organize herself like never before. She started researching books and the internet, looking for ideas for elegant and sophisticated floral decorations, something far different from the simple flowers she sold on the street. The following days were filled with visits to local flower shops, where Lila bought materials and flowers she could practice with at home. She spent hours experimenting with different arrangements, adjusting every detail, but the nerves consumed her. Every time something didn't turn out as planned, she felt a tightening in her chest. What if Michael is expecting something I can't deliver? Doubt seemed to whisper in her mind at every step. Bethany, though sick, noticed her daughter's stress. One night, while Lila worked on yet another arrangement in the corner of the room, Bethany called to her in a weak voice. Lila, you can't overwork yourself like this, she said, struggling. You're killing yourself over this. I have to do this, Mom, Lila replied, not taking her eyes off the flowers in her hands. This could get us out of this situation. I have to save you. I don't want you to feel like you have to save me, Bethany murmured, tears welling up in her tired eyes. You're already doing so much. I just want you to have peace. Lila stopped, her hands trembling. How can I have peace when I see you suffering like this? The question echoed in her mind. Deep down, she knew there was no other way. Her mother was her life, and she would do anything to make sure Bethany survived. As the event date approached, Lila began to feel the weight of expectation turn into almost unbearable pressure. The fear of failure haunted her every moment. What if the flowers wilted before the event? What if people didn't like the decorations? Worse yet, what if she couldn't finish in time? A week before the event, Lila had a nightmare. She dreamed she walked into the hall, and all the flowers were dry and broken. The guests laughed at her, and Michael, with a look of disappointment on his face, told her he had trusted her for nothing. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart racing. That morning, Lila looked at herself in the mirror and saw the dark circles forming under her eyes. The exhaustion was becoming visible, but she couldn't stop. Not now. It was all or nothing. 2 days before the event, Michael did something Lila didn't expect. He showed up at her house, something that surprised her because she hadn't expected someone so important to come to her simple neighborhood. When she opened the door, she was even more nervous to see him holding a small package. I brought you a gift, he said with a light smile. Lila accepted the package, confused. When she opened it, she found several professional gardening tools and a small note. In the note, Michael said he knew how hard she was working and wanted to make sure she had everything she needed to do the best job possible. She nearly cried reading it. It wasn't just the material help that moved her, but the fact that Michael believed in her in a way that so few people had. It was as if he saw something in her that even she couldn't see. I trust you, Lila, he said before leaving. You're going to do an amazing job, and your mother will be proud. Those words resonated within her, bringing a comfort she hadn't felt in a long time. As much as the fear still existed, something changed in that moment. Lila began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could actually do this. The day before the event, Lila stayed up all night, finishing the arrangements. She was exhausted but determined. Michael's new tools had made the work easier, and the arrangements were finally starting to take shape. As the sun began to rise, Lila put the final touch on a bouquet of white roses and sighed with relief. Everything was ready. For the first time in weeks, she felt a lightness in her chest. She looked out the window at the morning light streaming into the house and allowed herself a small smile. I did it. The day of the event had finally arrived. Lila woke up with her heart racing and her mind filled with worry. The work of the past few weeks had completely drained her, and the anxiety about the big day became more real with every passing minute. She dressed quickly, making sure everything she needed was organized before rushing to the event venue. On the way, her hands were sweating with nerves, and the dark circles under her eyes were a reflection of the long, sleepless nights. The grand hall where the charity dinner would be held looked even bigger and more imposing than she had imagined. The glass doors reflected the soft morning light, and as she stepped inside, Lila felt as if she were entering a world completely different from her own. This is the moment, she thought, taking a deep breath as she looked around the vast empty space that would soon be filled with flowers and, later, with people. I can't fail. Lila got to work quickly. The boxes of flowers and the arrangements she had spent the last few weeks preparing were ready to be spread throughout the hall. The elegant vases, the sophisticated bouquets, every detail had been carefully thought out and adjusted to create a stunning atmosphere, just as Michael had hoped. However, as the pressure mounted, small problems began to arise. Some of the flowers had wilted during transport, and one of the arrangements fell apart as she positioned it. Lila's heart raced. She desperately tried to fix the details, her hands trembling from exhaustion and fear that it was a sign that everything would go wrong. I can't mess this up now, she whispered to herself, trying to control her panic. Time seemed to move faster than normal, and with each little setback, the doubt in her mind grew. But Lila couldn't give up. Remembering the image of her mother, sick at home, she closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, trying to find the strength to keep going. I'm doing this for her. Step by step, she carefully adjusted every detail with renewed patience. Finally, after hours of work and adjustments, the hall was ready. The flowers, now in perfect condition, decorated the entire space with an elegance that even surprised Lila. The final result was far more beautiful than she had imagined. She took one last look at the hall before the guests started arriving. I did it, she murmured to herself, but there was still a knot of anxiety in her stomach. The real test was yet to come. As the sun began to set, the guests started arriving. Lila stayed on the sidelines, watching the steady flow of well-dressed people entering the hall. These were the men and women of Clearwater's high society, people Lila had only ever seen from a distance as they walked through downtown. With each new group that entered, Lila watched carefully for their reactions to the flowers. At first, no one seemed to pay much attention, and a chill ran through her. What if no one notices the work I did? She thought, distressed. But slowly, Lila began to hear discreet comments. What beautiful flowers, someone said, and she noticed a couple admiring one of the large arrangements she had placed in the center of the hall. More compliments followed as guests wandered through the space, and gradually, Lila felt a wave of relief wash away her fear. As nervous as she still was, it was impossible to deny that the arrangements were being appreciated. The flowers didn't just decorate the hall, they transformed the atmosphere. Lila allowed herself a small smile. I did it. For the first time, she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. In the middle of the party, while guests dined and laughed, Michael appeared. He was elegantly dressed, with a calm, confident smile on his face. When Lila saw him approaching, her heart sped up again, afraid that, despite everything, he might still be disappointed. So, Michael began, looking around the hall. What do you think of the result? Lila bit her lower lip, nervous. I did the best I could, she replied, hesitating. I hope it's what you imagined. Michael glanced around the room again, and a satisfied smile spread across his face. It's more than I could have imagined, Lila, he said sincerely. You did an amazing job. I'm sure your mother would be very proud of you. His words touched Lila's heart deeply. For a moment, she nearly couldn't hold back the tears, but she remained composed. Thank you, she murmured, her voice trembling. Michael reached into his suit pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to Lila. Here's what I promised, he said. Your payment for the work. This should cover more than enough for your mother's treatment. As she took the envelope, Lila felt the weight of responsibility and hope begin to lift a little. That money meant Bethany could finally get the treatment she so desperately needed. The relief was immediate, but at the same time, Lila knew she didn't want to live in this cycle of desperation forever. Sensing the mixture of emotions on her face, Michael added something that Lila wasn't expecting. You have incredible talent, Lila, but you're still too young to carry such a heavy burden. Lila looked at him, surprised. I do it for my mom, she said, almost offensively. I know, Michael replied softly, and I admire your strength, but I think you deserve more. You still have a future ahead of you, and you need to take care of that too. Lila was silent, unsure how to respond. Michael continued. I want to make sure your mother gets all the treatment she needs. I'll take care of that. His words echoed as absolute relief to Lila. But you need something too. I want you to go back to school, to have the chance to be a real teenager. I'll help you get back to your studies and make sure you get the education you deserve. The proposal seemed unreal to Lila. The idea that someone could take care of her mother's treatment, allowing her to go back to school, felt like an impossible dream. For so long, Lila had carried the burden of caring for Bethany, and now, for the first time, someone was offering her the chance to just be a 13-year-old girl again. You'd do that? Lila asked, her voice trembling, still trying to process what was happening. Yes, Michael said, with a calm smile. You deserve a life, Lila, and I want to make sure you get that chance. This will be our deal. As long as you're studying and doing well, I'll keep your mother healthy too. Okay? Lila looked at the envelope in her hands, then back at Michael. The tears she had been holding back finally fell, not out of sadness, but out of relief. Thank you, she whispered, the words almost choked by emotion. As the night went on, Lila couldn't stop thinking about what the future now held for her. For the first time in a long time, the fear that had accompanied her for so long began to fade. Michael had given her not just an opportunity but a new life. Bethany would receive the treatment she needed, and Lila could finally go back to school, something that had become a distant dream. With every compliment she heard about the flowers, with every smile she saw on the guests' faces, Lila felt stronger. They really liked my flowers, she thought. The event had been a success, and now, for the first time, she could dream of a future that wasn't just about surviving day to day. As Michael walked away to talk to other guests, Lila looked around the hall once more, feeling relief and hope growing inside her. Everything had changed, and this time, for the better. The sun was brighter that morning than Lila remembered. She woke up feeling something different, a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. When she opened her eyes, she realized that the weight she had carried on her shoulders seemed to have lifted. For the first time in a long time, there was a sense of hope in the air. The house was still small and simple, but the atmosphere inside was different. The fear and desperation that had filled every corner of those walls were being replaced by something new. Possibility. Lila walked quietly to Bethany's room. The familiar sound of coughing was still there, but this time, it wasn't as intense. Her mother, pale and tired, was lying down, but there was something different about her expression. When Bethany opened her eyes, she smiled at Lila, a smile that, despite her frailty, brought relief. "Are you feeling a little better?" Lila asked softly, sitting beside the bed where she had spent many nights wide awake. Worried, Bethany nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, I think so. The treatment is starting to work." Her voice was still weak, but it no longer had the constant tone of exhaustion and despair. Those words were like balm to Lila's heart. Seeing her mother respond to treatment was all she had wanted. That morning, the future seemed less bleak. Michael, keeping his promise, was taking care of Bethany, ensuring she received the proper treatment for her chronic lung disease. Doctor visits, medications, and care that had once been unimaginable were now within reach, all thanks to the kindness of someone who had believed in Lila when no one else had. While Bethany continued her treatment, Lila also took her first steps into her new life. At first, the idea of returning to school felt strange. After so much time away, dealing with books and homework seemed distant from the reality she had known. But every time she remembered what Michael had said, that he would take care of her mother while she focused on her studies, Lila felt more determined to move forward. The first days back at school were challenging. Lila felt out of place. The laughter and conversations between her classmates seemed so distant from her reality that she could hardly participate. While they talked about parties and outings, all Lila could think about was how her life had been taken over by responsibilities far greater than any other 13-year-olds. "I'm not like them," she thought at one point, feeling the isolation grow. But she knew she had to try. Little by little, Lila began diving into her studies, focusing on catching up on the time she had lost. Every time she sat down to do her homework, she remembered the promise she had made to Michael and to herself. "As long as you're studying and doing well, I'll keep your mother healthy too." Those words echoed in her mind like a constant reminder that she couldn't fail. Lila spent hours going over subjects she hadn't touched in months. Math was a challenge, with numbers and formulas swirling in her head, but she forced herself to keep going. Studying was hard, but each small achievement made her feel like she was on the right track. More than ever, she wanted to make up for lost time, and slowly, she began to realize that she was making progress. As the days passed, the classes began to make more sense. Lila grew more confident with each equation she solved, with each new word she learned in her readings. The feeling of isolation started to fade, and she began making new friends, kids who didn't know her story but treated her with kindness. For the first time in a long time, she was becoming a normal 13-year-old girl again, surrounded by people her age, sharing common experiences like laughing at recess and talking about simple things. Meanwhile, Bethany continued to improve, though the progress was slow. The frequent doctor visits and the right medications were finally making a difference. The cough that had once seemed endless and suffocating was now more controlled, and Bethany could breathe a little easier. "I feel stronger every day," Bethany said to Lila one afternoon as they sat at the dinner table together. Something they hadn't done in months. Bethany's voice was still soft, but there was hope in it. "We still have a long way to go, but I think I'm going to make it through this." Lila smiled, her eyes welling up with tears. "You're going to be okay, Mom. I know you will." The new routine brought a peace that Lila could barely remember. She still had responsibilities at home, of course, but no longer the unbearable burden of being her mother's sole caretaker. Bethany's treatment was in good hands, and for the first time in a long time, Lila could focus on something other than despair. One night, while doing her homework, Bethany called to her from her room. Lila went over and saw her mother sitting on the bed, with a thoughtful look on her face. "You're doing well in school, aren't you?" Bethany asked, her tone full of curiosity. "Yes," Lila replied, sitting next to her. "It's still hard sometimes, but I'm learning. I'm getting better." Bethany smiled, her eyes filling with pride. "I knew you were strong, Lila, but you're surprising me more and more every day." Lila smiled back, feeling the warmth of those words. The weight of everything they had been through was still there, but for the first time, she felt like she was emerging from a long darkness. Her mother was getting better, and her life was slowly returning to a more normal pace. One morning, while accompanying Bethany to one of her doctor's appointments, Lila saw Michael in the clinic's waiting room. He was talking to one of the doctors, and when he saw her, he waved with a warm smile. After the appointment, he approached them. "How's school going, Lila?" he asked, looking at her with the same confident gaze that always made her feel at ease. "I'm doing well," she replied, smiling. "It's not easy, but I'm doing my best." Michael nodded, satisfied. "I'm glad to hear that. I'm sure your future is going to be bright." Lila felt the warmth of his words. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, looking at him sincerely. "You saved our lives." Michael shook his head gently. "You did all the hard work, Lila. I just gave you a little push. The rest was all you." She smiled, feeling grateful for everything he had done, but also starting to believe more in her own strength. The future would still bring challenges, she knew, but now she had something she hadn't had in a long time: hope. As the months passed, Lila's life began to change. The routine of going to school and helping with Bethany's treatments no longer felt so overwhelming. Every day, her mother's health showed signs of improvement, and Lila felt lighter, almost as if the weight of years of worry was finally starting to lift from her shoulders. Bethany, though still in recovery, was now able to do simple tasks around the house, and on some days, she even walked around the block without feeling the unbearable exhaustion she once did. The constant sound of coughing was becoming rarer, and her words, though still cautious, now came with a lightness Lila barely remembered hearing. "I'm getting stronger," Bethany said one morning while folding some laundry. "Maybe soon I'll be able to start sewing again and bring in a little extra money." Those words were music to Lila's ears. Seeing her mother talk about the future, making plans, was something she hadn't heard in a long time. "That would be great, Mom," Lila replied, smiling. "But take it easy. I don't want you to overwork yourself." Bethany agreed, but the determined gleam in her eyes showed how much she longed to regain her independence. Knowing that her mother was getting closer to being self-sufficient was an immense relief for Lila, who was beginning to realize that her own life was also about to change. At school, Lila was focused on her studies, but an extracurricular activity ended up catching her attention in a special way. Since organizing the flowers for Michael's charity event, she had felt more connected to the idea of creating things with her hands. That's when, walking down the school hallway, she noticed a poster about an extracurricular course in crafts, focused on design and creating handmade artistic objects. It was something different, a break from the world of formulas and numbers that challenged her so much, and she decided to sign up. The classes quickly became a passion. Lila discovered she had a natural talent for working with simple materials and transforming them into something beautiful. Under the guidance of the crafts teacher, she learned to create everything from small decorative objects to more complex projects. Her classmates began to notice her skill, and the teacher, who also recognized Lila's potential, encouraged her to go further. "You have an incredible eye for detail," the teacher said during a class where Lila was creating a delicate arrangement of paper flowers. "Have you thought about pursuing this outside of school? There are programs that offer scholarships for talented students in design and crafts." Lila was surprised. She had never considered that this passion could lead somewhere. I didn't know that was a possibility," she replied, a little shy. The teacher smiled. "Talent like yours can't be ignored. There's a summer program at an art institute in the capital. They offer scholarships to students who stand out, and I think you have a good chance of getting in." That idea echoed in Lila's mind for days afterward. A summer program at an art institute seemed far from her reality, but at the same time, exciting. Encouraged by her teacher, Lila decided to enter the scholarship competition, submitting some of her projects as part of her portfolio. Weeks went by, and Lila continued with her studies and her mother's recovery. The competition for the summer scholarship had slipped from her mind when, on a regular afternoon, she was called to the principal's office. Her heart raced. She didn't know if it was something good or bad. When she got there, she found her crafts teacher with a smile on her face. "Lila," the principal began, looking at her with approval, "we received a letter from the Art Institute. You've been selected for their summer program with a full scholarship." For a moment, Lila was speechless. I got in." She could hardly believe it. "You did," confirmed the teacher, full of pride. "Your talent has been recognized, and now you'll have the chance to study somewhere that will help you develop it even more." Lila left the office feeling like she was floating. The summer scholarship to the art program was more than just an opportunity. It was a sign that her future could be so much more than she had ever imagined. For the first time, she could see a clear path ahead, and it was no longer filled with uncertainty and fear. With her heart still racing from the news, Lila knew there was someone who needed to hear it. She arranged to meet with Michael at a small cafe in town, the same place where they had met for the first time when he had bought a bouquet and changed her life. When he walked in, Lila felt a familiar warmth of gratitude. Michael was a busy man, but whenever they spoke, he treated her with attention and care, as if time stopped for a moment to listen to her words. When he sat down at the table, Lila couldn't contain her excitement. "Michael," she began, almost out of breath, "I got a scholarship for a summer program at an art institute." Michael smiled, visibly pleased. "That's amazing, Lila. I knew you had something special from the moment I saw the work you did at the event." Lila felt a tightness of emotion in her chest. "All of this was possible because of you. You gave me the chance to breathe, to focus on something other than just surviving. And now I can think about my future." Michael nodded, with a fatherly look. "I gave you an opportunity, but you did the rest. Your talent and your strength brought you here." Lila took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears threatening to fall. But there was more she wanted to say. "And there's something else. My mom is getting better, much faster than we expected. She's even talking about going back to work, maybe sewing like she used to." Michael's eyes brightened at the news. "That's fantastic, Lila. Seeing your mother getting better and you excelling. It's everything I hoped for when I decided to help you." Lila couldn't find the words to express how much it all meant to her. She was sitting in front of the man who, in a gesture of kindness, had transformed her and her mother's lives. "Michael, I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice nearly breaking with emotion. "I know you didn't have to do any of this, but thanks to you, my mom is alive." Michael smiled again, with his typical calm. "I didn't do anything but give you a push in the right direction. The rest was all you." He paused, thoughtful, then added, "You know, Lila, back when I was a little older than you, in my 20s, I went through hard times too. I was lost, not knowing which way to go. But someone came into my life and offered me the help I needed. If I'm here today, it's because that person believed in me and gave me a chance, just like I did for you." Lila looked at him intently, absorbing his words. It was the first time Michael had shared something so personal, and she felt an even deeper connection with him. "So, in a way, you know what it's like?" "Yes," Michael nodded. "We all need someone to believe in us at some point. The important thing is what we do with that opportunity. And you're doing something incredible, Lila. Your mother is alive, and you have a talent that can take you far. Never underestimate that." The weeks leading up to Lila's trip to the summer program at the Art Institute were intense. Every day, her mind was divided between excitement and nervousness. The thought of leaving Clearwater, of leaving her mother, even if only for a few weeks, made her anxious. It was the first time she would venture so far from home, alone, and the weight of that responsibility followed her every step. Bethany, on the other hand, was getting stronger every day. The treatment was working, and although she still needed to rest, she could now perform household tasks without the excessive effort she had once needed. Her cough, which had once been a constant sound in the house, was now rare, and her breathing was lighter and more relaxed. One hot summer afternoon, as Bethany sewed a piece of clothing for a neighbor, Lila watched her in silence, feeling a deep sense of relief. "I'm getting stronger every day," Bethany said without taking her eyes off the fabric in her hands. "Who knows, maybe in a few weeks I'll be able to take on more sewing jobs." Bethany smiled, watching her daughter with pride. Although money was still scarce in their lives, Bethany knew she wanted to see Lila happier with each passing day, especially after everything they had been through. "You're going to love it. The great thing about art is that you can experiment with everything. And I know you're going to create something amazing, whether it's with flowers, paint, or something else." Lila smiled back. Seeing her mother like this, active and healthier, was something she had wished for so long that now it almost felt surreal. As the day of the trip approached, Lila began preparing for her journey to the Art Institute in the capital. It wasn't just the excitement of exploring something new, but also the feeling that, for the first time, she would get to do something just for herself. For as long as she could remember, her life had been about taking care of her mother, selling flowers, surviving. Now, for the first time, Lila felt like she could experience something that was hers alone, focused on something she loved. She and Bethany went into town to buy the supplies she needed. Lila still remembered the first time she had looked at flowers differently, when she was preparing the arrangements for Michael's charity event. Now, as she walked through the aisles of the art store, she felt that same sense of wonder. Brushes, papers, paints, tools. Everything seemed to sparkle for her. "Look at this, Mom," Lila said, picking up a box of watercolors, her eyes shining. "I've never used watercolors before." Bethany smiled, watching her daughter with pride. "You're going to love it. The great thing about art is that you can experiment with everything. And I know you're going to create something amazing, whether it's with flowers, paint, or something else." Those words stayed with Lila as they continued shopping. When they returned home, Lila was already imagining the projects she would create at the institute, her hands tingling with excitement. The day of the trip came quickly. Lila was finishing packing her suitcase, and the silence in the room felt almost heavy. Each fold of the clothes, each material placed carefully into the backpack, was accompanied by a thought, "I'm really going." Bethany sat beside the bed, watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. She didn't say much, but Lila knew her mother was also processing the idea of being alone for the first time in a long while. "Is everything ready?" Bethany asked, breaking the silence. Lila paused for a moment, looking at the open suitcase in front of her. "I think so," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "It's a strange feeling, leaving home, even if it's just for a few weeks. I think I'm nervous." Bethany nodded, understanding perfectly what her daughter was feeling. "It's normal to feel that way. It's your first time away from home, and you're going to something big. But remember, you deserve to be there, Lila. This is your talent being recognized. You worked hard to get here." Lila smiled, feeling comforted by her mother's words, but still with a knot of anxiety in her chest. "I know, but it's still hard. I just want you to keep getting better." "And I will," Bethany said firmly. "Don't worry about me. This moment has passed, and when you come back, I'll be here, waiting to hear all the amazing stories you'll have to tell." At the bus station, the air was warm and humid, and the sound of engines and conversations around them mixed with the buzz in Lila's mind. She gripped the strap of her backpack tightly, her heart beating faster as the moment of departure approached. When the bus arrived, she gave Bethany a tight hug. "I love you, Mom," Lila said, feeling the emotion rise in her throat. "I love you too, Lila," Bethany replied with a soft smile, though her eyes were bright with tears. "You're going to do amazing things. Enjoy every moment." Lila climbed onto the bus and sat near the window, watching as Bethany's figure slowly faded into the distance until it disappeared completely from view. When the bus finally began to move, she felt a wave of nerves but also freedom. For the first time, she was heading towards something new, something that was hers. The trip was long, but when Lila finally arrived at the Capitol and the Art Institute, it all seemed worth it. The place was even more impressive than she had imagined. Tall glass buildings reflected the sun, while well-kept gardens decorated with modern sculptures surrounded the campus. The environment was inspiring, unlike anything she had seen in Clearwater. She took a deep breath as she stepped off the bus, looking around with wide eyes. The soft sound of the wind through the trees and the distant laughter of other students gave the place a peaceful yet energetic creative atmosphere. It was exactly the kind of environment she wanted to be in. At the reception, Lila was greeted by the program coordinator, a middle-aged woman with short hair and a welcoming smile. "Welcome, Lila," she said, handing over a clipboard with the details of her room and schedule. "We're very happy to have you here. I'm sure you'll feel at home." Lila smiled, feeling the nerves begin to fade. "Thank you," she said, taking the papers. Her room was simple but comfortable, with a view of the Institute's main garden. After settling in and organizing her things, Lila decided to explore the campus. The place felt magical. Every corner held a surprise. Students painting outdoors, sculptors shaping figures from clay, and others sketching intently in their notebooks. "This is my world now," Lila thought as she walked through the halls, watching the talent around her. But at the same time that she felt the excitement of being part of something so grand, she also felt the weight of responsibility. She knew it wouldn't be easy to stand out among so many talented young people. The next day, Lila attended her first official class at the Institute. The teacher, a renowned visual artist, began by asking each student to show something from their portfolio. Nervous, Lila presented one of the floral arrangements she had made during Michael's charity event. She explained how she had begun to take an interest in floral design and how her experience had changed the way she saw art. When she finished, the teacher looked at her thoughtfully. "You have a unique talent," he said. "Your way of thinking about space and detail is impressive. I want to see how you apply that to other materials. Step out of your comfort zone, try something new." Those words stayed with Lila throughout the week. She threw herself into the projects with a dedication that surprised even herself. Throughout her weeks at the Institute, she experimented with paper sculptures, creations with recycled materials, and even painting on canvas, something she had never tried before. Each new project seemed to open a different door within her imagination. During her evening walks around campus, when silence settled over the place and the other students were in their rooms, Lila thought about how much her life had changed so drastically. The memories of the days she spent selling flowers on the streets, desperately trying to scrape together enough money for her mother's treatment, felt like a distant dream, a life that belonged to someone else. Now, she was in a place where her talent was valued, where she could explore her creativity without fear. And yet, despite all the progress, Lila never forgot where she came from. In every phone call to Bethany, she felt the deep connection between them. "Mom, I'm learning so much," Lila would excitedly tell her. "I'm trying things I never thought I'd do." "I knew you'd love it," Bethany would reply, always proud. "And I'm getting better every day too. When you come back, I'll have a surprise for you." Those conversations comforted Lila, reminding her that, even though she was far away, her mother was there, recovering and rooting for her. When Lila returned to Clearwater, she felt transformed. The experience at the summer program at the Art Institute had expanded not only her skills, but also her vision of what was possible in her life. Her mother was waiting for Lila at the station. "You did it, Lila," Bethany said, her eyes brimming with tears. "Everything you've done, everything we've overcome, it was all worth it. I missed you so much, but I'm so proud of you." "I missed you too, Mom," Lila replied, feeling tears well up in her own eyes. "But it was an amazing experience. I have so much to tell you." That night, the two sat together in the living room, where they talked for hours. Lila excitedly described every detail of the summer program, from the first classes to the new friends she had made and the techniques she had learned. But what surprised her most was how she had discovered a new passion: painting on canvas. "Do you remember when I told you about floral design and how much I loved it?" Lila began, her eyes bright with excitement. "But Mom, at the Institute, I found so many other things. When I tried painting on canvas for the first time, something inside me lit up. It was like I had found a new way to express myself. Now, every time I start painting, I feel so much joy. Everything connects. I don't know how to explain it." Bethany listened to every word, captivated by how much her daughter was growing. "I knew you had talent, Lila, but I'm so happy you found something that truly makes you feel complete. It's beautiful to see that in you." "Yes, and I realized I want to keep exploring this passion," Lila continued, excited. "Painting allows me to go beyond what I ever imagined. That's why I decided I want to do something special." Lila then explained her idea: to paint a picture as a gift for Michael, as a way of thanking him for everything he had done for her and Bethany. "I know it's little compared to all he's done for us," Lila said, her voice full of emotion. "But now that I've discovered how much I love painting, I think it's the best way to express my gratitude. I want him to see what his help has allowed me to find." Bethany smiled, proud of Lila's maturity. "I'm sure he'll love it. A gift from the heart is worth more than anything else. And I'm sure that, for Michael, it will mean the world." In the days that followed, Lila threw herself into creating the painting for Michael. She wanted it to be something special, something that symbolized not only her gratitude, but also the growth she had experienced. She began painting an image that combined her old passion for flowers with her newfound love for painting. The canvas came to life with vibrant colors, flowers that seemed to dance in the wind, with delicate yet strong brushstrokes that showed the freedom she now felt in expressing her art. Every detail of the painting was carefully thought out, and Lila worked with dedication and patience, remembering every moment that had led them to this point. When she finally finished, she looked at the painting with pride. "This is the best thing I've ever done," she thought, emotional. "I hope he sees how much this means." When the day came to present the gift, Lila was nervous but also eager to see Michael's reaction. She and Bethany went to Michael's office in town, where he greeted them with his usual warm smile. "Lila, Bethany, what a pleasure to see you," he said, shaking both their hands. "How was the summer program? I'm curious to hear all about it." Lila exchanged a glance with her mother, who encouraged her with a smile. She then revealed the canvas she had carefully wrapped to protect it. "Michael, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for us. I know it's little compared to everything you did, but I love what I've discovered. Painting has given me a new way to express myself, and I wanted to give you something from the bottom of my heart." She unwrapped the painting and presented it to Michael, who stood silent for a moment, absorbing every detail of the work. The flowers, which seemed to vibrate with life on the canvas, blended with tones of freedom and renewal. Michael smiled, visibly moved. "Lila, this is more than I could have imagined. You couldn't have given me a better gift. Knowing that I helped you find something you love, that's the greatest reward I could receive." Lila smiled, relieved and happy. "You changed our lives, Michael. And this painting is a small way to show you how grateful I am. Thank you for believing in me." Michael, deeply touched by Lila's gesture, decided that the painting would have a place of honor in his office. He hung it on a wall where all his important visitors would see it. Since Michael was an influential man in town, many prominent people, business people, politicians, and local artists frequented his space. Lila's painting, with its unique beauty and silent message of hope and perseverance, began to attract attention. Several visitors commented on the work, asking where it came from, who had painted it, and if the artist behind the canvas had more pieces. Before long, Lila started receiving invitations to exhibit her paintings at local events and art fairs. People were curious to see more of her work, and thanks to the opportunity Michael had given her to display her art, doors she had never imagined began to open. "Can you believe this, Mom?" Lila asked, incredulous, as she showed Bethany the first invitation to an exhibition. It all started with that painting for Michael. Bethany, her eyes filled with tears, smiled. "I knew this would happen, Lila. You have an incredible talent. And now people are seeing what I've always known." As the months passed, the opportunities for Lila continued to grow. Her paintings began to gain visibility, and she became known as a promising young artist in town. She participated in several exhibitions and was invited to collaborate on projects with other local artists. With patience and dedication, Lila began to build a solid career in the art world while still enjoying her youth. And all of this was thanks to the gift she had given Michael, a simple gesture of gratitude that opened the doors to a promising future. "It feels like a dream," Lila confessed to Bethany one day as they walked through the street after one of her exhibitions. "I never thought something like this could happen to me." "It's more than a dream, Lila," Bethany replied, with pride in her voice. "You made it happen, and there's so much more to come." The path that Lila and Bethany had walked was difficult, but now, with the past behind them and a bright future ahead, they were ready for whatever came next. Lila's art and Bethany's strength were living expressions of their journey, and together, mother and daughter knew that the future was filled with color, opportunities, and, most of all, hope. With each brushstroke and each new painting, Lila wasn't just celebrating the present, but also the possibilities that lay ahead. She knew the world still had much to offer, and she was ready to embrace it all with enthusiasm, talent, and the unwavering support of her mother. I hope you enjoyed this emotional story. If it touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our future stories. Share it with your friends and leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your opinions and suggestions, so we can continue bringing you stories that move and inspire.